The first reading is from 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 13 to chapter 5, verse 1. Just as we have the same spirit of faith that is in accordance with Scripture, I believed and so I spoke. We all believe and so we speak. Because we know that the one who raised the Lord Jesus will raise up us also with Jesus and will bring us with you into his presence. Yes, everything is for your sake, so that grace, as it extends to more and more people, may increase thanksgiving to the glory of God. So we do not lose heart, even though our outer nature is wasting away. Our inner nature is being renewed day by day. For this slight momentary affliction is preparing us for an eternal weight of glory beyond all measure. Because we look not at what can be seen, but at what cannot be seen. For what can be seen is temporary, but what cannot be seen is eternal. For we know that if the earthly tent we live in is destroyed, we have a building from God, a house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Our gospel for this morning is from Mark, the 3rd chapter. Jesus went home, and the crowd came together again, so that Jesus and his disciples could not even eat. When his family heard it, they went out to restrain him, for the people were saying, "He has gone out of his mind." And the scribes who came down from Jerusalem said, "He has Beelzebub, and by the rulers of the demons he cast out demons." And he called them to him and spoke to them in parables. How can Satan cast out Satan? If a kingdom is divided against itself, that kingdom cannot stand. And if a house is divided against itself, that house will not be able to stand. And if Satan has risen up against himself and is divided, he cannot stand, but his end has come. But no one can enter a strong man's house and plunder his property without first tying up the strong man. Then indeed the house can be plundered. Truly I tell you, people will be forgiven for their sins and whatever blasphemies they utter. But whoever blasphemes against the Holy Spirit can never have forgiveness, but is guilty of an eternal sin. For they have said, "He has an unclean spirit." Then his mothers and brothers came, and standing outside, they sent to him and called him. And a crowd was sitting around him, and they said to him, "Your mother and brothers and sisters are outside and asking for you." He replied, "Who are my mother and my brothers?" And looking at those who sat around him, he said, "Here are my mothers and my brothers. Whoever does the will of God is my brother and sister and mother." The gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. Let us pray. Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of our hearts be acceptable to you, Lord, our strength, our Savior, and our Redeemer. Amen. As we continue through this series of us being works in progress, we hear this powerful connection in Mark of a lot of stuff smushed together, a lot of sayings of Jesus put together, and we could parse all of that out and spend a few hours here talking about each one of those in turn. But I promise you I won't do that today, unless you really want me to. I'll take that as a no. But as I thought about that this week, and I thought about those readings and what all of this means, what I was struck by was Jesus' comments about division. So I'm curious what your thoughts are. What do you believe is the most divisive thing that is plaguing our nation, our communities, and our families? Anybody want to share? What? Politics. Anything else? Anybody else want to share? Swifties versus non-Swifties. Taylor Swift fans and non-Taylor Swift fans. Yeah. Anything else? Religion? I think we've hit a few of them. So how quickly do we let those things divide us? How quickly are we willing to talk with someone, to seek understanding, to willingly hear them out, to ask questions, or do we quickly make a snap judgment, decide to ignore their beliefs and understandings because they're not exactly like our own? Instead of having a conversation, we devolve into arguments and quickly pit us against them. Jesus says two different ways in our gospel reading today. A kingdom and a house that is divided will not stand. We've seen it, haven't we? We've seen families torn apart by political leanings. Whether you're on one side of the aisle or another politically, or let's be honest, most of us who are more in the middle, but that's not an option anymore. It's not acceptable. Because the extremes are all we want to talk about. And yet here Jesus is reminding us about our connection with each other, about our connection to each other, and what that might look like. Here, Jesus calls those who are gathered around him brothers and sisters in Christ. He calls them, he calls us family. What he does is redefine the family parameters in this topic, because he shows that anyone who does the will of God, anyone who lives into what God is calling them to do, is part of God's family. It almost seems fascinating that now we are changing this concept. Because, and I own this, family members die, they become estranged, and those friends that we have had become family. Jesus doesn't say his true mother, Mary, and his brothers were not his family. He just said, I'm extending my family. And if you ever think you're the second one in your family, think about how Jesus' parent or siblings must have felt. Well, who's your brother? The Son of God. But here, Jesus reminds us that we are connected. That we are connected by a God who loves us, who calls us children, who claims us as family. And yet, we have to realize, because as Jesus calls us family, just like our own families, we don't always get along with everyone. We don't always have the same understanding because we have different experiences. We have lived different lives. And therefore, we see things differently, but we also have different things to offer. Each of us has a unique perspective. So is it welcomed and supported or not? How are we being shaped by all of that? Really? Okay. I knew I had some hecklers in the crowd, but usually it comes from over here. There's a little one over here when I said that. Went, well, all right. Keep it up. That's fine. Yeah. Where was I? Yes, because we are being molded. We are being shaped by our own experiences. We are not the same person we were before March 2020, or last year, or last month, or yesterday. I am living proof of that, and my wife can attest to this. Because yesterday, I was supposed to be in person at Synod Assembly in Wyomissing. And I was at Synod Assembly online on the couch with a fever of over 100 and aching. I don't know why. Thankfully, I'm much better today. But here we are being molded, being shaped by what we go through on a daily basis. Sometimes our experiences challenge us. Sometimes they help us grow. Sometimes what we see in the world is not easy. Neil Henderson put it this way: challenges will come to you, but as you trust in God, they will strengthen your faith. Growing stronger in faith is never easy. If we ask God to strengthen our faith, what we are really asking God to do is challenge us so that we can grow faithfully, which comes with the challenge, which comes at this opportunity to move forward, to be molded, and to let God do the molding. Do we believe that? Do we trust that? Do we trust that God is still molding us at whatever age we are? At whatever point in life we are? Or would we rather go, no, God, I'm good. Can we just freeze me here? I'm fine. I don't need to learn anything else. I don't need to be challenged. I'm just happy the way I am. Because God's molding isn't just about us as individuals. Remember, He calls us family. He calls us connected. He seeks that we have this direct connection, not just with God, but with each other. That's important. That helps guide and strengthen and support, and yes, sometimes struggle with family. It's not always easy to get along with family. Trust me, I know. Jesus had struggles with His family too. But if we remember this, if we remember in those trying times, in those harsh times, we are being molded by God. We are being challenged to live into what God is doing in and through us. To be uplifted, to be cared for, to be guided into who God is forming us to be. It's not always the same, but God is there. So how do we respond to it? Do we fight it? Do we ignore it? Do we walk away from it? Or do we lean into being able to be molded? To hearing the promise of God for the world around us, to be able to be shaped by a God, by a Creator who loves us, who seeks that we have life and have it abundantly. But we are often focused on the divided house. I don't know if Russell was the one to say this or who, but it says it's not possible to love God and hate your brother, your sibling. So what does that look like for us? When we struggle with those who disagree politically with us, And yes, I have had colleagues that come at me, well, but we need to speak up against this and we need to speak up against that. You're right. But we can do it faithfully and lovingly rather than harshly. We can find a way to do this. As Jesus went through this gospel reading, there were people who were shouting at him that he was the devil incarnate, and he goes, you know what? The only true sin that is unforgivable is telling God that it's God's the devil, like you're doing now. But let me show you how to love instead. Let me show you what family looks like. Let me show you what connection to God is, because it is about loving one another, even those that put you down, even those who say you are the devil, even those who spit and revile you, who send you to the cross. Christ says to his followers, love one another as I have loved you. Care for one another. The mission that God has for us, the care that God has for us is based in love. The molding that God is trying to do in our lives, even though it may be uncomfortable, even though it may be challenging, even though we may not like it, is based in God's love for us and for the world around us. And that is why I believe Jesus reminds us of the importance of being a family together, of being connected, of living into our faith as a community, of caring for one another. Because growing together requires, it does. I know. Let her be now. Who knows? It's either her or I'll see a squirrel go by and I'll get distracted. So, living together, growing together requires conversation. It requires presence. It does. It requires people being here. It requires an openness. It requires a care for one another and a willingness to listen. That also means to struggle together. It also means being in community, about being molded in God's mission for us. That is what God's promise is about. God's mission, God's promise isn't about furthering an institution. It's not about gaining membership. Those are byproducts of God's mission. God's mission is to love one another. It is a relationship. It is a family of adopted people of a God who calls us into love, into a group of imperfect people, because God doesn't use perfect people because God can't find any perfect people. Thankfully, God seeks us. God offers us grace. God offers us forgiveness, hope, love again and again, so that we may understand what God means when God says faith, hope, and love abide, these three, as St. Paul says. And the greatest of these is love. So if you are struggling with your faith, with someone else, perhaps God is seeking to mold you. If you are in a good place and enjoying life, give thanks for it and enjoy it, because perhaps you are being called on to walk with someone who is being molded, someone who is struggling. As a community, we are invited, encouraged, and called out to be molded together through the love of God that God has for each of us together as family. And that is why here we profess God's mission for us is grounded in the love of God, which is both an invitation and a challenge to share. God's love is molding us. May we be open to the love of God more deeply this season as we see ourselves as works in progress, and we allow ourselves, by the grace of God, to be molded. Amen.